go. All right, good evening. My name is Bruce Johnson, and I'm Chief of the Coast Guard Auxiliary's Youth Programs Division. This evening, we'll be discussing the April 2020 revised version of the Standard Operating Procedure, or SOP, for the Auxiliary Sea Scout Youth Development Program, which the Coast Guard refers to as AuxScout. In this, we will cover as much of the SOP as time permits, covering what is most important for you to know and focusing on what changed in the C version of the SOP that was released in April of 2020. I've highlighted some changes in this presentation in red to bring the changes to your attention. You're strongly urged to carefully read through the SOP. Please type your questions in the chat box, and we'll definitely have time at the end of the workshop for them. And I have to tell you, I'm not going to be monitoring the chat box, so please be patient, and we will get to them at the end. This workshop will give you a very brief introduction to the AuxScout initiative. If you haven't already done so, please plan on attending the AuxScout Workshop 102, Introduction to AuxScout. Following the introduction, we'll do a deep dive into the AuxScout SOP. At the end, we'll recap the most important points. Sea Scouting is the Boy Scouts of America's program open to older youth who are at least 13 and have completed the 8th grade and have not reached their 21st birthday. It was founded in 1912 and is BSA's longest tenured older youth program and is focused on nautical activities. BSA's goal is to train youth in responsible citizenship, character development, and self-reliance by participating in a wide range of outdoor activities, educational programs, and career-oriented programs in partnership with community organizations like the Coast Guard Auxiliary. Sea Scouting has been open to both young men and young women since 1972. Its goals are to promote these objectives through instruction and practice in recreational boating safety, boating skills, and social and other events. It also, It also promotes STEM education, leadership, community service, and life skills. The original Memorandum of Agreement, or MOA, between the Scouts and the Auxiliary was developed in 2009. It was a very broadly worded agreement that provided a framework for the two groups to work together, with specific activities being conducted on a case-by-case basis. Each party collaborated in a broad range of projects that supported recreational boating safety and promoted citizenship training and character development, including public education programs, water safety educational outreach, facilities resource support, and volunteer support. More recently, the Auxiliary and the Boy Scouts of America signed a new MOA in 2018 that extended and strengthened the ties between the Auxiliary and the Sea Scouts. As a part of this MOA, the Auxiliary adopted the Sea Scouts as its official youth program. The MOA's objective is to integrate Sea Scout youth and adults, as well as Sea Scout units, which are called ships, into Auxiliary shoreside and underway programs. Strengthening the ties between the two groups is mutually beneficial. A stronger relationship allows Auxiliary flotillas and divisions to become Sea Scout ship chartered organizations or sponsors. This also provides the Sea Scout youth with a broader pool of adult leaders with seamanship skills and training, as well as access to vessels. In addition, Auxiliary programs facilitate advanced science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM-oriented training. So let's turn to the AuxScout Standard Operating Procedure, or SOP, that was issued on April 10th of 2020. The SOP outlines how specifically we should be working with the Sea Scouts. This document was developed by the Chief Director's Office with the direct involvement of auxiliaries who have extensive experience working with Sea Scouts. Everything in the SOP has been tested and works well. Although the SOP is particularly directed towards auxiliaries who work with Sea Scouts, it also provides the ground rules for Sea Scouts who interact with the auxiliary and the Coast Guard. The SOP has some overarching objectives. The Coast Guard wants us to provide enhanced training opportunities for Sea Scouts. They want us to introduce Sea Scouts, their parents, and their adult leaders to the Coast Guard using Coast Guard recruiters, as well as to training opportunities that come with auxiliary membership. The Coast Guard sees our working with the Sea Scouts as an important opportunity to push the recreational boating safety mission to the general public and particularly to younger boaters. It's important to note that although the SOP makes several commitments to provide this support, it does not impose legally binding requirements on either the auxiliary or the Sea Scouts. As we implement the AuxScout SOP, questions occasionally come up. All SOP questions should go to your district AuxScout staff officer or members of the National Youth Program staff. In most cases, the SOP probably covers your question, but occasionally there may be a need to adjust the SOP's language. If that is the case, the DSOAS and National Youth Programs Chief will develop a proposal to address your question. It's worth saying that some of the policy guidance in the SOP seems to contradict the current language in the auxiliary manual. The next edition of the auxiliary manual will include these policy changes. Now let's get to the SOP's details by talking about who is covered. An important membership standard change is that currently registered Sea Scouts who are at least 14 years old may apply for auxiliary membership. Sea Scouts who are under 14 years old can't apply for auxiliary membership until they've reached their 14th birthday. Once a Sea Scout joins the auxiliary, they must continue their Sea Scout membership until at least their 17th birthday. If they drop out of Sea Scouts before 17, they will be disenrolled from the auxiliary within 3 months. All Sea Scouts or Sea Scout leaders participating in auxiliary programs, whether they're auxiliaries or not, are expected to abide by the AuxScout SOP. All Sea Scouts or leaders may attend auxiliary flotilla or division meetings or activities as our guests. They don't have to be specifically invited. The SOP says that they are invited. Sea Scout youth, however, must be accompanied by an adult. Although Sea Scouts and their leaders are encouraged to consider auxiliary membership, they are not required to join the auxiliary. As has always been the case, auxiliaries are permitted to serve as BSA adult volunteer leaders. Many currently do, and we expect that even more will become adult Sea Scout leaders. The other big change is that auxiliary flotillas are allowed to and encouraged to charter Sea Scout units, which are called ships. Each flotilla can charter a single ship, and each division can charter a single ship. What that means is that a division with, say, 5 flotillas could have as many as 6 ships chartered. While that's not very likely to happen, it is permissible. The Auxiliaries National Youth Programs Division is a part of the Student Programs, or S Directorate. This is incidentally a change that has taken place in the last 2 months. It is responsible for providing program oversight for AuxScout. They work directly with your DSOAS and are there to provide policy direction and resources. All auxiliaries are strongly encouraged to become familiar with the MOA and SOP and get up to speed on the details about the AuxScout program. Additionally, although not everyone is required to take BSA youth protection training, many are, and everyone is encouraged to complete YPT training. This slide talks about what you should be doing if you interact directly with BSA youth members. You must read and be thoroughly familiar with the Auxiliary Sea Scout MOA and the AuxScout SOP. You must be current with auxiliary core training, and of course that's required for anything that you do in the auxiliary, and you must successfully complete youth protection training. When completed, print out the completion certificate and give it to your flotilla commander. The FC will send it to your DIROC so that YPT completion can be entered into your AuxData training record. This training must be renewed every 24 months. Note, some districts handle this reporting process differently. Double check with your DSOAS to confirm how your DIROCS wants you to send it in your YPT completion certificate. We're frequently asked what is meant by regular interaction with BSA youth. The rule of thumb is that if you have any direct interaction, including face-to-face, email, telephone, or text with BSA youth within a calendar year, the Coast Guard considers it to be regular interaction. Simply teaching a state boater education course that's open to the general public or inviting Sea Scouts to attend a flotilla or division meeting, however, does not trigger that threshold. It does, however, include having Sea Scouts on an OPVAC. Additionally, if your flotilla charters a Sea Scout ship, the SOP lists several specific positions that are required to have completed YPT training. If we had to boil down youth protection to a single statement, never put yourself in a one-on-one situation with any BSA youth. Always employ 2-deep leadership, which is to say there must be at least 2 adults present. They don't have to be auxiliarists though. A Sea Scout leader or a parent can be one of those adults. When the activity is co-ed, which is to say the activity includes youth of both genders, then the adult leadership must also be of both genders. If the youth are all of a single gender, then at least one of the adults must be of that gender. The SOP also calls for some additional training in certain situations. When Sea Scouts are involved in swimming-related activities associated with the Auxiliary Paddlecraft or AuxPAD program training, then at least one adult must hold current BSA Safe Swim Defense training certification. This can be fulfilled by a Sea Scout leader, but it will be the responsibility of the auxiliarist mission commander to ensure that that training has been done. Additionally, if Sea Scouts participate in a mission involving auxiliary service facility, then at least one auxiliarist must hold current BSA safety afloat and CPR training certification prior to commencing the mission with the Sea Scouts. Note that this training requirement cannot be accomplished for the auxiliarist by somebody else. At least one auxiliarist must hold these training certifications. Both BSA Safe Swim Defense and BSA Safety Afloat training are available online, and each takes about a half an hour to complete. Now let's turn to what's involved in chartering a Sea Scout unit. As we've already noted, each flotilla and each division is allowed to charter a Sea Scout ship. While we don't expect that every flotilla or division will do this, many are interested in doing so. BSA has a procedure for completing this process from the scouting perspective, and any local Scout Council or Sea Scout leadership cadre can help you with that process. Now let's talk about what the Coast Guard requires. The flotilla or division that wishes to charter a Sea Scout ship must request permission through their chain of leadership for authorization to charter a ship. The request can be done via email, and it should ultimately be addressed to your Director of Auxiliary or DIROCS. All adult leaders who will be registered with the ship must complete BSA Youth Protection Training. This also includes the unit commander, such as the flotilla commander, vice commander, and the following staff officers: AuxScout, Human Resources, Member Training, and Operations. The request must include the names of all prospective youth and adult members of the Sea Scout ship. It's very important that auxiliary units work with the Sea Scouts to follow Coast Guard policies. Also, you should work with auxiliary and Coast Guard public affairs staff to publicize what you're doing with the Sea Scouts. The Coast Guard sees this as important public outreach, and they want as many people to know about it as possible. Oops. As is the case with everything else we do, all auxiliaries involved in this effort must be current in core training, and both AuxCT and youth protection training must be completed before assuming their office. If another staff officer is working directly with the Sea Scouts in their official capacity, they must complete YPT training. An example of this would be a public affairs staff officer who's working with the Sea Scouts to put on a boating safety booth at the local boat show. In this case, the PA officer must complete youth protection training. The SOP mentions two types of consent forms that you should be aware of. The first is a parental consent form that is required for any Sea Scout under 17 if they participate in an auxiliary activity other than regular flotilla or division meetings. The auxiliary mission leader is responsible for visually confirming that the forms are completed, signed, and present before any Sea Scout can participate. This next point, however, is very, very important to pay attention to. The auxiliary mission leader must not retain these forms. They should be returned to the Sea Scout adult leader for their retention. Further, the auxiliary is not allowed to record any Sea Scout PII. Review the SOP carefully for the exact details of this requirement. The other consent form is the ANSC 7020 Alpha form, which is completed by all Sea Scout youth and adults whose images are recorded in any way. For example, if Sea Scouts are photographed on a training patrol or at a safety at sea event, an ANSC 7020 form must be completed. Once the form is completed, the original should be forwarded to the Coast Guard Auxiliary Association. A copy can be retained by the Sea Scout unit, but the local auxiliary unit must not retain a copy. The Coast Guard is prepared to provide certain types of support for this effort. Sea Scouts who are auxiliaries are authorized to use Coast Guard training and recreational facilities. They may participate in Coast Guard cruises and air operations at the discretion of the commanding officer and with district commander approval. And per section 1.b.9 of the SOP, look at that for specific instructions for Sea Scout auxiliaries who are under 17 who wish to visit a Coast Guard facility. For hours reporting, and this came up before our workshop started, all AuxScout related hours are supposed to be recorded. Auxiliaries who are not Sea Scout members should include the note enter operation code AUX-SCO1 for AuxScout activities only. Auxiliaries who are Sea Scout members should include the note enter operation code AUX-SCO2 for all auxiliary activity, regardless of whether it is related to AuxScout or not. I realize this is a little bit confusing, but this is how the Coast Guard headquarters wants it done. If you are a registered Sea Scout or Sea Scout leader and you're doing anything for the Coast Guard or the Coast Guard Auxiliary, you should use the operation code AUX-SCO2 on all of your hours reporting forms. If you are not BSA registered, then you should use AUX-SCO1, but only for AuxScout activities. Let's talk about what the SOP allows Sea Scouts and their leaders to do. Sea Scouts and Sea Scout leaders may participate in any auxiliary program to the extent authorized in the SOP. Sea Scouts and Sea Scout leaders who are not enrolled in the auxiliary are welcome to attend auxiliary unit meetings as guests. Sea Scouts under 18 must be accompanied by a parent, guardian, or person in loco parentis consistent with BSA youth protection training. Sea Scouts under 17 years old who enroll in the auxiliary may train in any auxiliary competency. They can also attend sea schools if the training is local to them. If it is not local to them, however, they are not permitted to attend. So for example, I live in Annapolis, Maryland. If a Sea Scout in Annapolis wanted to attend a sea school that was being held at the Coast Guard Yard in Baltimore, they would be allowed to attend. If they wanted to attend a sea school in Miami, they would not be permitted to attend. They can qualify for several competencies such as vessel examiner, program visitor, instructor, and boat crew, but they may not qualify as a coxswain, personal watercraft operator, paddlecraft operator, aircraft commander, first pilot, or co-pilot until they reach their 17th birthday. They can, however, train towards that and complete portions of the competencies. They just can't qualify for any of those mission commander roles. There are some additional limitations for Sea Scout auxiliaries who are under 17. Sea Scout auxiliaries under 17 may not serve in any elected office. Sea Scout auxiliaries under 17 may serve as the FSO-SR. They can also serve as Communication Services or CS, Public Affairs or PA, and Publications or PB flotilla staff officers if their flotilla commander requests a waiver from DIROX and DIROX grants it. See section 2.b.2 in the SOP on page 10 for specific instructions for making this request. Here are some other instructions. As has always been a case, auxiliaries can perform vessel safety checks on vessels that are owned or operated by the Sea Scouts or other BSA members. The auxiliary will provide Sea Scouts and other BSA members with recreational boating safety literature for distribution to Sea Scouts or the public. A good example of this is if a Sea Scout ship would like to distribute recreational boating safety literature at a scout show or at a boat ramp. In this case, they can request the literature from a local flotilla, which will order it for them. If it's available, the literature will be sent to the flotilla, which will then pass it along to the Sea Scouts. Other activities that are specifically covered. We're encouraged to hold joint operations between auxiliary facilities and Sea Scout facilities to promote professional development with appropriate authorization from Coast Guard order issuing authorities. The auxiliary shall provide shoreside and underway training to Sea Scouts and other BSA members at auxiliary installations and on operational facilities belonging to or used by the auxiliary or the Coast Guard in a manner consistent with all Coast Guard, auxiliary, and BSA policies. Auxiliary mission leaders must ensure that all Sea Scouts and leaders are fully outfitted with all PPE as required for the mission. We should encourage the Sea Scouts to bring their own PPE, but if it is inadequate for the mission, we should loan it to them for the time of the activity only. Additional instructions about AuxScout activities. Auxiliary facilities with Sea Scouts aboard shall not be scheduled for search and rescue, SAR, standby duty, nor SAR response missions. If an OPFAC with Sea Scouts aboard must respond to a SAR incident, the Sea Scout shall not be involved in the operation. They can be aboard if the mission commander feels that it is safe for them to be there. All auxiliary boat, air, and radio facility crews are expected to have strong mentoring skills and prior experience working with youth or younger trainees. The objective for having Sea Scouts aboard our facilities is for them to learn from us to help them to qualify for their Sea Scout rank requirements. Auxiliaries who are training Sea Scouts are expected to carefully read the information provided on AuxB Wiki. For all missions involving an auxiliary facility carrying Sea Scouts or leaders who are not auxiliaries, the order issuing authority must be made aware that the facility will be carrying them as guests. Provide names of Sea Scouts and leaders aboard, so when you request patrol orders, make it known that you plan on carrying Sea Scouts. It is the order issuing authority's prerogative to say yes or no to the request. Now let's talk about STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Auxiliaries are authorized to provide STEM activities to Sea Scouts to supplement but not supplant their Sea Scout rank requirements. These activities should only be performed if they're aligned with auxiliary training methods and materials. STEM program support is provided by the Youth Programs Division. Monthly online STEM workshops are held on the fourth Tuesday of the month and are keyed to Sea Scout advancement requirements. Details are posted on the AuxScout and Sea Scouts BSA Facebook groups. Additional opportunities are also in development. We've received several questions about which uniform should be worn when working with Sea Scouts. Sea Scouts and leaders who are not auxiliaries must wear the appropriate Sea Scout uniform while participating in auxiliary activities. Sea Scouts and leaders who are auxiliaries shall wear the appropriate auxiliary uniform when assigned to duty and engaging in auxiliary activities. Sea Scout ribbons or insignia are not authorized for wear on auxiliary uniforms. Auxiliaries who are Sea Scouts or leaders shall wear the appropriate Sea Scout uniform when engaging in Sea Scout activities when not assigned to auxiliary duty. You'll note that the Sea Scout uniform looks very similar to our ODU uniform. That's important to know, though, that this uniform is still fairly new to the Sea Scouts, and not all Sea Scout units have adopted it yet. Many are still using legacy uniforming that is US Navy style. Over time, these legacy uniforms will be replaced with the dark blue uniform pictured here. So what's new in the April 2020 standard operating procedure? Well, first of all, a flotilla staff officer AuxScout position is now authorized. Only flotillas that are actively working with the Sea Scout should fill this position, and this would be particularly true if a flotilla is chartering a Sea Scout ship. But if you're partnering with a Sea Scout ship or working actively with the Sea Scouts, it would make good sense to fill this position. A job description and report templates are available on AuxSB Wiki. All AuxScout staff officers at all levels must complete BSA Youth Protection Training and Sea Scout Adult Leader Basic Training. They must complete the BSA Safe Swim Defense and Safety Afloat Training. They must be thoroughly familiar with the MOA and the SOP, and they must be thoroughly familiar with AuxSB Wiki. Another change with this SOP, when DIROX approves a flotilla or division chartered Sea Scout ship, the district commodore, the district staff officer for AuxScout, and the division chief for youth programs must be notified by DIROX that this action has been taken. The requirements for who is required to take youth protection training were clarified. All of the National Youth Programs Division staff is required to take youth protection training. District elected officers that have auxiliary chartered ships. In divisions chartering units, the division commander, vice commander, staff officers for AuxScout, human resources, member training and operations. And in flotilla chartering ships, the flotilla commander, vice commander, and flotilla staff officers for AuxScout, human resources, member training and operations. The district staff officer for legal affairs and parliamentary procedures is also required to take youth protection training. And of course, the district staff officer the district staff officers are supposed to be appointed upon consultation with the division chief of youth programs. Here's something to remember. Every Sea Scout ship is going to be different based on geography, boats available, the support of the local boating community, the knowledge and skill level of the adults, and the interests of the scouts. There is no one single right way to carry out the Sea Scout program. A good rule of thumb, though, is that if a Sea Scout ship gets young people out on the water and helps them to learn how to boat safely while allowing them to have fun, then they are successful. Some Sea Scout ships are already working with other groups that are providing them with strong support. Examples of this include the U.S. Power Squadrons and some local yacht clubs. Where this is the case, respect the relationship and offer them whatever assistance they can use, but don't interfere with the relationship that's working well. Try to understand what the Scouts' needs are and determine how you can fit best into their program. Sea Scouting is our youth leadership development program. If your flotilla doesn't put anything into this relationship, you won't get anything out of it. A question I would put to you is how many flotillas in your district would be materially improved if they had more younger members? I'm willing to bet that nearly every flotilla would benefit from that relationship. Would your flotillas be more effective in talking with young people if they had the help of teenage Sea Scouts? I'm certain that's true. Think about your local boat show. Is a passing teenager likely to talk to a Coast Guard auxiliarist who's the age of their grandparents? They're much more likely to talk to another teenager. Remember that Sea Scouts are almost always the best and brightest in their communities. These are the young adults that we want to be working with. We want them to develop a positive impression of the Coast Guard and the auxiliary, and it will only happen if we make the effort to reach out to them and help them. The more you invest, the greater the payoff. You'll help to develop teenagers who are safe boaters and who will be lifelong boaters. We want Sea Scouts, their parents, and their leaders to form a positive impression about the auxiliary and the Coast Guard. We'd like Sea Scouts, their parents, and their leaders to consider joining the auxiliary. And finally, we're hoping that some Sea Scouts will consider Coast Guard careers. Now, this is a listing of a number of resources that you need to be familiar with, and I'd like to ask you to not madly copy this down because the address that I want you to copy down is on this next page. Copying down tinyurl.com/AuxScout links 3. All of the links that were on the page that I just whizzed by are on this page. So just copy that down, and then after this presentation, point your web browser at that and it will take you to a page of links. You should probably save it and then test out those links to see what they're all about. It takes you to links on the SOP, the MOA, the AuxB Wiki, what training is available, and a number of other things that would be very useful for you to know about. So before we get to questions, and we'll get back to this in a moment, I mentioned to you that there is an AuxScout Sea Badge course that is coming up in February. This is 2 weekends long advanced Sea Scout leadership training, and it has been customized for the Coast Guard Auxiliary audience. It's going to be on the weekends of the 6th and 7th and 13th and 14th of February from 9 to 2 in the afternoon Eastern Time. And if you're interested in registering for that, I've set up a link here, which again, you can copy down tinyurl.com/AuxScout-CBadge. The cost for this weekend, this training is $25. And I know I've heard from some auxiliaries, why isn't it free? Well, the training is free, but there is a recognition item that comes with completion of the training. And unfortunately, that isn't free. This is being provided by the Boy Scouts of America, and they have no funding to provide the recognition items. So that's what you're paying for, that and the shipping of it. And if this sounds like it's something that interests you, I would urge you to sign up. The registration deadline is this Friday, and I can tell you that it's a hard deadline. As of this morning, there were 51 people signed up. So it's really looking like it's going to be a very popular and successful course. I incidentally was attending a staff meeting right before this workshop, and they have a terrific staff lined up for the course. So I would urge you to consider going to this training. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop recording and go back to the questions page, and it's your time to ask questions. So first, let me stop the recording.